All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first Culinary Conversations workshop series. I'm Ryan Bolhuis, the Culinary Operations Manager for the Downtown Market Grand Rapids. For those of you who are new, Culinary Conversations is a collaborative effort between GROW, MSU-Product Center, Start Garden, and the Downtown Market Grand Rapids. Through Culinary Conversations, we hope to shine a light on the West Michigan food industry and almost more importantly, to help educate food entrepreneurs. Normally we do this through virtual panel discussions or live events, networking events. But tonight we're actually going to take a little bit of a different direction and again do the first of our workshop series. So a little bit shorter of a presentation today, but it's all focused on educating entrepreneurs on different aspects of the food industry and starting up a food business. So tonight we'll be discussing the do's and don'ts of food licensing. Joining us tonight will be Kendra Wills of the MSU-Product Center. So the format tonight, Kendra and I will be doing a short presentation covering the basics of food licensing and some things to kind of watch out for. After that, we'll be doing a short Q&A. So in regards to Q&A, a couple things to remember as far as food licensing goes. There are a lot of small variables that can change the direction that you need to take. So for instance, if I'm a salsa maker versus somebody who's doing meal prep, those would fall into the same jurisdiction, but they have very different approaches. So for all of you out there that are watching, please feel free to enter any questions that you have in the comments section of the YouTube live stream, and we'll make sure to address as many as we can following the presentation. With that, I would like to introduce Kendra Wills. Welcome, Kendra.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, of course. So with that, actually, I'm going to pass things off to you if you would like to get us started.
Great. Well, welcome everybody. We're happy to have you join us. We have an agenda tonight to cover, and we have a lot of time to talk about your questions at the end. We're excited to take your questions. So we're here and we'll stay as long as we need to. So I'm going to start off with a little bit about launching a business, and then we're going to get into the Cottage Food Law and selling fruits and vegetables and packaged goods. So before you really get into the licensing question, we wanted to have you ask yourself some questions about starting a food business. So what are you trying to accomplish? What are your goals? How much time do you have to devote to this project? Do you have personal funds to invest? It's hard to get investors when you're not personally invested first. Do you have the necessary skills and qualifications to launch a food business, or do you need to do some training to do that? Or maybe do you need to get a job in the industry first? Are you able to make a product at the price that your audience is willing to pay? So that involves a lot of research, recipe development, what kind of competition do you have in the marketplace? All of these components are part of a business plan. So once you start asking yourself these questions and answering yourself, we encourage you to write your answers down in some kind of a document using a business plan template if you like. There's lots of options online. And really honing in on what you want to accomplish and how you want to be able to launch your business. Next slide, please. So when you're forming a business, it's important to officially form a business before you actually get your licensing. And the reason is you want your licensing in the name of your formal business. So there are some steps to do before you apply for a food business license, in addition to a business plan. So first, you want to make sure nobody else in the state of Michigan has the name that you want. And you'd be surprised. There are a lot of businesses out there. It could be an accounting firm with your same name, or a hair salon. You want to make sure nobody in the state has the same name. And there is a website that the state of Michigan offers to check that. Then you want to decide what's the best structure for your business. Is it a sole proprietorship, a partnership, an LLC? There are great online resources, and we can help you just make some decisions about that, or you can seek out an attorney to help advise you. Securing an EIN from the IRS and will help you get a bank account with your formal business structure documents. And securing liability insurance is an important step to get into a commercial kitchen if you need one to launch your food business. So all of these should be done in your business name. That's why we're talking about that before you get your license. There are some steps, to form that formal business structure. Next slide, please. So the Cottage Food Law, we get all kinds of great questions about this law. It's from 2010 when this law was first adopted. And there are people making a great living on this kind of business working out of their home kitchen. You can earn up to $25,000 a year in net sales. So there are certain foods that you can make in a home kitchen under this law. And at the very bottom is a great website. The state of Michigan's Cottage Food Law website is very helpful. It's set up in a question and answer kind of format. We have the link in the YouTube description. We encourage everybody interested in this law to check out that state of Michigan website. So there are general categories, mostly foods made with fruits, maybe allowed baked goods, candies, ready to packaged popcorn. You can't make it on site, but if you have it pre-made and packaged, and roasted coffee. So you can't, serve beverages, but you can sell roasted coffee grounds or beans under the Cottage Food Law. Unfortunately, and this was a bummer during COVID, no online sales are allowed, only face-to-face sales. So commonly, people are selling out of their home, or they're selling at farmers markets or art fairs, craft shows, those kinds of venues. So you must be, as the business owner, you must be the one to sell your product. You can't hire a family member, you can't hire an employee to sell your products. You have to be the one selling. And there are very strict labeling requirements that you must follow to have a product under the Cottage Food Law. So next slide, here are some don'ts that we talked about. So here are some very common questions that we get. Can I make something like beef jerky in my home kitchen and sell it at a farmer's market or sell it to people that I know? No, unfortunately, no meat products are allowed under Cottage Food Law. Nothing with meat would be allowed. Can I make kombucha at my home and sell it? No beverages of any kind are allowed under Cottage Food Law. Salsa is also not allowed. Anything with vegetables. There are a few exceptions, but most products that have any kind of vegetable in them, salsa with having peppers and tomatoes and onions, it is not allowed under Cottage Food Law. And can I make something like elderberry syrup? Immunity foods have been very popular during COVID, anything to help build people's immune systems. Unfortunately, a lot of times elderberry syrup are refrigerated products, so anything that's refrigerated, even the cream pies that required refrigeration, are not allowed under Cottage Food Law. So as you can see, this is a limited law. There are very limited kinds of foods that are able to be made under this law, and this is what we're here for, to help you answer questions. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us, or there's a toll-free number with the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development you can find on their website, and you can ask them if what you're thinking of is allowed. Next slide, please. So, selling fruits and vegetables that you grow, you do not need a license. This is a surprise to a lot of people. You don't need a license to sell fruits and vegetables that you can grow. So you can grow fruits and vegetables in your backyard and apply to be a vendor at a farmer's market, and no license required. You should check with local zoning if you want to build a roadside stand, or if you want to build an on-farm farmer's market or on your property farmer's market. Check with your local zoning before you do that, because it may not be allowed under your local jurisdiction. So your city or your township, you will have to check with them. Now, there are some new laws that are coming into effect called the Food Safety Modernization Act. And very small growers are exempt, but you have to prove that you're exempt. And we have some trainings through MSU about that. We want to make sure that the food is produced safely, a lot of water testing and making sure that food is done in a safe manner, and you're not going to make any of your customers sick. And if you wanted to connect with other growers in the West Michigan region, the West Michigan Growers Group is a great group. They have a website and a Facebook page if you wanted to connect with other area farmers selling direct to customers. Next slide. This one's yours, Ryan, I think. Oh, you're on mute.
That's the motto for the last year and a half. Sorry about that, everyone. Thank you, Kendra, for all the information. So next, we're going to talk about different licensing. So this can be very difficult. You know, who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to get a license from? What are the requirements from that jurisdiction? So to start off with, any food business in the state of Michigan is always going to fall under one of two jurisdictions, and that's either going to be the state, which would be MDARD, or the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, or you're going to fall under your county health department. So RTE foods, which is what we're going to talk about first, or ready-to-eat foods, are what fall under county health department. This can include anything from STFUs, food trucks, restaurants, catering companies, all fall under RTE and fall under Kent County or county health department. So both have pretty similar requirements, but we'll go through each one just to kind of show the slight differences. So first and foremost, definitely have to operate out of a commercial kitchen. If you're doing any type of RTE foods, you certainly cannot operate under cottage food, as Kendra said, just due to the higher risk. Now, a lot of obtaining a food license, a lot of it is centered around food safety. So the next big thing that we want to look at is ServSafe certification. There are multiple ways to obtain food safety certification, but the most prominent is definitely going to be ServSafe. ServSafe is nationally recognized. That means if you decide to move to a different state, your ServSafe will still apply. The certification that you would need is going to be a ServSafe Food Manager certification. Generally, that can what I usually recommend is going online to servsafe.com, and you have the option of taking a class and exam in person. Predominantly right now, it's recommended to still take it virtually. I personally always like to take it virtually anyways, just because I find that it fits a little bit easier into most people's schedule. Generally speaking, that should cost right around $200, which might sound like a little bit larger of a financial investment right off the bat. But what's great about ServSafe specifically is that it's good for 5 years. So in the big scheme of things, it's not too bad of an investment. The big reason why generally we like to recommend ServSafe first is because a lot of steps after this make a lot more sense and are just easier to navigate after you've taken food safety training. So the next big thing for RTE foods that we'll want to take a look at is your SOPs, or your standard operating procedures. So with standard operating procedures, also as well with health department, you'll also be required to fill out a partial or a full plan review. With both of these documents, this is what most people consider the most daunting aspect of this. It's a lot of writing. You do have to be somewhat thorough. But really, in general, what they're looking for is that you can take all the food safety knowledge that you gain during ServSafe, for instance, and that you can apply it to your processes, your business, and your specific product or service. A couple of things to always recommend with your SOPs. You don't have to get necessarily too detailed. They just want to make sure that you understand food safety and how to properly apply it. Both myself and Kendra are certainly resources that can help you step through this process and make it a lot easier to understand and to navigate. Another big thing with RTE foods to think about is you will need to charge Michigan sales tax. So definitely make sure that you factor that into your costing. So with RTE foods, one of the things that I like about RTE foods and that licensing is it's actually a fairly fast process. So If you ever do need help, feel free to reach out to myself or Kendra, and we'll also go over some additional resources at the end of the presentation. Now let's talk about the one that definitely grew substantially over the last year and a half or so due to all things COVID, packaged foods. This will include anything that, especially things that you find in stores, packaged meals, salsas, barbecue sauces, things of that nature. Anything like that will almost always fall under MDARD, or basically state jurisdiction. Now, there are quite a few similarities in what's required. For instance, you do have to operate out of a commercial kitchen. You do have to complete SOPs. You do have to take ServSafe or another type of food safety training. But where it differs is normally for RTE, that's basically the end of the food safety requirements. But for packaged foods, there's a couple more steps that we need to take. So first and foremost is going to be packaging requirements. So this is actually very easy. The biggest thing you have to remember with packaging requirements is that it has to come from an approved source. So that can be any place, Gordon Food Service, Cisco, Webstaurant, Uline. So there's quite a few options out there. There are even some local options as well. The next thing to focus on is going to be labeling requirements. The labeling requirements, they can seem a little bit daunting as well. However, it's really just a lot of little things. In my opinion, the toughest thing about labeling is honestly the design work, because you spend so much time making this really great, beautiful logo, and now you've got to surround it by a bunch of government requirements. So some of those requirements would include, you'll have to have an ingredients list, which needs to be listed out in a pretty specific manner. A good way to think about that is basically from the most used to the least used. Another big thing to remember with your ingredients list is sub-ingredients. So for instance, if you're making something with chocolate chips, the ingredients that make those chocolate chips would also have to be listed in your ingredients list. Another big one, especially for entrepreneurs that are operating out of shared facilities, is going to be an allergen statement as well as an allergens list. You'll definitely want to have a use by date. Lot coding is very important as well. Your net weight, and this needs to be in imperial and metric. The address of the licensed facility where the product was made. And then some things to consider are definitely barcodes or UPCs. For any wholesalers, this is definitely something that I would consider putting onto your label right off the bat. And then nutrition facts, all of which the nutrition facts specifically is something that MSU-Product Center can certainly help out with, an amazing resource with any label requirements. Some other things to consider with packaged foods that are sometimes overlooked. So most packaged foods are going to require some form of lab testing if you want any type of extended shelf life. So with any type of packaged food, for instance, frozen has to remain frozen, refrigerated has to remain refrigerated, and so on and so forth. Now, if it is a refrigerated product and you want it to have a shelf life beyond 7 days, that's going to always require some form of lab testing. That can differ depending on what the product itself is. Generally, what you see, for instance, with a lot of bottled ingredient or bottled products, or like salsas or sauces, things of that nature that are refrigerated, generally they're going to look for a water activity. They're definitely going to more than likely look for a pH level, and possibly aerobic plate counts as well. Best thing to do is to contact a food lab to set up to the shelf life testing. A couple that we always recommend is Alliance or Summit Labs. Both are great labs to work with, very education-based as well. So you can certainly, if you type either of them in into Google, it should be the first things that show up there. Now, if you want room temperature shelf life, this is where it gets a little bit more, not necessarily difficult, but it does have a couple extra requirements for it, if you will. So some products will require a variance, possibly HACCP and PAR. A good rule of thumb that I always like to go by with this is if you want it room temp, you're probably going to need at least HACCP and PAR. As you can see at the bottom of the slide here, one of the best resources for HACCP or PAR is certainly going to be MSU-Product Center. Now, HACCP and PAR are basically required if any type of extra process basically is required. For those of you who have gone through food safety training, a good way to think about it is if is something outside of the parameters of what you've learned about in food safety training, it will more than likely require some type of variance, HACCP, and PAR process. Now, HACCP and variances specifically, again, they can seem a little bit daunting. If you've done SOPs before, or those standard operating procedures, they're actually quite similar. But the variance in the HACCP is just more detailed. Again, that's something that MSU Product Center and myself can certainly help you out with. And there are some other resources around town as well that we'll mention at the end of the presentation here. And then I believe Kendra, if you want to go through some of the resources around town.
Sure. And we did have a question from Mark. We just wanted to note that we saw your question. We will get to questions at the end. So I think we can take that one at the end. But thanks so much for putting a question in there. Where can I go for help? So certainly we wanted to mention the Downtown Market Incubator Kitchen, which Ryan manages. It's a 5,000 square foot commercial kitchen, free consultations. You can't beat it. It is a beautiful facility. We are so fortunate to have that in our city. And of course, the MSU Product Center. So we have an intake process on our website. These links are included in the YouTube description. We also have a grant from the Wegge Foundation going through the end of this year to cover the $50 application fee for minority entrepreneurs from Kent County. It means non-white. So we only ask you to pay the $50 application fee one time. It's unlimited counseling hours after that. It's just so we can cover a little bit of cost to operate our center and our staffing. We try and cover everybody statewide as we possibly can. Just a little note that I think both of our facilities, we can't do health or beauty products. We don't do dietary supplements because those have different regulations from the FDA. And we can't do anything related to cannabis because that's a product that's not yet federally allowed in foods. So those rules, the cannabis may change, but right now we both can't do anything with cannabis. Next slide, please. So there are other great resources in Grand Rapids. We have so many entrepreneurial support organizations, and we encourage everybody to get assistance wherever they are most comfortable. So Grow is a wonderful coaching, mentoring resource. Spring GR has a cohort to walk you through your business plan development. The Small Business Development Center has wonderful online resources. SCORE does a lot of mentoring, former employees, accounting, diving into your business plan. Start Garden has a new startup space website to pool resources for startup entrepreneurs. And they are posting events. And we have a conference coming up. The Product Center has an annual conference. This year it's virtual, May 27th through May 6th. Lots of different sessions, lots of different events, a pitch competition, a chef showdown. There's a link on the website to find that, or if you just want to Google Make It in Michigan. Next slide. We know that funding can be challenging. We get a lot of questions about funding, and banks are really reluctant to support new food business startups. We have seen time and time again that people are just not able to access funding from a bank. You may be able to, but it's not common uncommon to not be able to. So we have a great guide through the MSU Center for Regional Food Systems. I think this is about a 30-page guide. It covers anything from like Kickstarter campaigns all the way through grants and loans and getting ready for a loan. I encourage you to check that out. Also, if you're making a healthy food product and you're sourcing local ingredients, it's going to be affordable. People may be able to use a bridge card to purchase your product. You may be eligible for some funding support from the Michigan Good Food Fund if you want to check out that and fill out a form to see if you're eligible for their support. And a lot of food business entrepreneurs have gotten their start through Start Garden's 5x5 monthly pitch competition. You can earn $5,000. They have them every single month. So this is a great place. It also gets you some exposure for your product and your ideas, some coaching and assistance from Start Garden. Next slide. Yeah, I think that was the end. So we are in our questions section, and Mark's question is first up. Do packaged foods with small amounts of alcohol, and it changed my certification requirements and licensing, and who can I sell it to? Great question. We didn't cover liquor. So there is a rule that says foods or beverages must have less than 0.5% alcohol by volume, 0.5%. So a food lab, those two labs that Ryan mentioned, Alliance and Summit, can help you, test your alcohol levels. So you want to be under that. If you're over, you need a license from the Michigan Liquor Control Commission to sell your product. And you may only be able to sell it to people over the age of 18 or 21 in some circumstances. You may have seen that on some kombuchas. That's probably the most common food product that applies to. But anything that's got flavoring, like barbecue sauce might have some flavoring, jams or preserves, they're all below the 0.5%. And they all are regularly tested for that alcohol by volume test. So it would be the same licensing if you're below that 0.5, and you would show that to your inspector. You would show those test results so they can see that. They will ask you at your licensing inspection appointment to see those test results. Anything to add to that, Ryan?
No, I mean, that covers it all. I feel like, yeah. From a culinary aspect, when reducing down alcohol for certain percentages, there are some mathematical equations that are easily found online for anybody who's wondering. Actually, Kendra, I have a question for you based off of that. Are they required to regularly measure that per batch?
Yes, good question. The Department of Agriculture will want to see that you're keeping track of your ingredients when you're making batches, and that you are logging your ingredients by weight. We always want to have recipes developed by weight, and they will ask you to see your records to make sure that you're hitting those limits, that you're going by those guidelines of what your recipe is, and that you're meeting the same recipe that has that alcohol by volume testing done by a lab that you have to prove you're meeting within the guidelines. So lots of record keeping involved in food business. So you can't be shy when you are starting a food business about keeping records. That's really important aspect of it. Being organized and keeping track of your financials, or finding somebody to keep track of your financials if that's not your favorite thing to do. Those are all really critical aspects.
Sure. Again, everyone, so the food licensing, again, this is just kind of a general overview, but if anyone has anything specific you'd like to ask, whether it be, specifically food trucks or packaged foods or anything like that, feel free to ask those questions in the comment section on the YouTube there. And but other than that, Kendra, could you, while we wait for some questions to come in, would you be able to speak a little bit more on PAR and kind of what that process is through MSU-Product Center?
Yeah, so process authority review applies to mostly packaged foods with a water activity greater than 0.85. And how do you even know what your water activity is? You have it tested by a food lab, or it's part of the PAR process to actually test your water activity. So if you're making something like barbecue sauce, hot sauce, mustards, any kind of jams or jellies with vegetables in them, so pepper jellies, salad dressings, all of these are shelf stable, and they have a high water activity. They have water in them, and we want to prevent botulism mostly and other kinds of bacteria. So a process authority is actually a person, and this person has been determined by the Food and Drug Administration to have enough knowledge about food science to determine, based on a recipe and review of a process, that this process is safe. So the first step is when MSU coordinates the PAR process for almost everybody in the state of Michigan, because our food scientist that is the process authority for our state works for Michigan State. And so we collect your recipe and process on paper and over email. It's all protected by a confidentiality agreement under trade secret. We absolutely know that recipes are very confidential and highly sensitive information. We have them review your documents, and then they send you instructions for sending in samples to have them tested for pH and water activity. Your process is reviewed, your samples are reviewed, and then you're issued a letter, a classification letter from your process authority. So if you're in an acid classification, you may be able to move forward and make your product. If you're in acidified food classification, additional training may need to be done to make sure that you understand your food safety knowledge. So there are some different steps. It all really starts with your recipe. We need your recipe by weight, and we need your recipe in a big enough scale that you're going to be making batches off of this recipe. So if you have a really small scale recipe that you've been making just for your family, we want you to scale up that recipe before you start the process authority, if that makes sense. So you have a bigger batch that you're going to develop and sell commercially. I see we have some other questions in there. I know I can probably talk for half an hour about process authority review.
Yeah, and HACCP and all that. Yeah, it's going to be a whole nother one of these events probably. So Ian asks, are frozen foods, say popsicles, made entirely from shelf-stable ingredients covered under cottage food laws?
I think that's a really good question, but refrigerated foods, if you remember, or frozen foods aren't allowed under cottage food law. So anything that makes you have to put it into a refrigerator is not allowed. So you have to be working in a commercial kitchen to make that product, unfortunately.
Correct. To kind of expand on that with frozen foods as well, that actually kind of brings up a subject that I think sometimes kind of gets overlooked, and that's specifically ice cream makers. With the warm weather coming up, well, hopefully, in theory, with the warm weather coming up, you do see a lot of frozen desserts and whatnot start to enter the market and whatnot. For anyone considering becoming an ice cream maker and launching an ice cream business, one big thing to think about with wholesaling especially is if you're making your own ice cream, there's kind of an extra step in there with pasteurization. Kendra, you and I have spoke extensively about this. So there's something to consider. MDARD will require that according to food code, and that can be somewhat of a hurdle for a lot of ice cream makers when they get to that point. So generally speaking, you need to have a specific piece of equipment. A pasteurizer is what it's called, and it can be a little bit pricey, but that is kind of if you're at that point, you've made it to tier 2, in my opinion, when you're getting ready to launch the wholesale side of the business. So let's see, looks like Yum Pouch has a great question. Does pH level need to be checked on a regular basis? Another great question. Yes. If you had to have lab testing basically prove that your pH levels are within a safe range, for instance, what would be a good example? Cocktail kits. Let's say home cocktail kits is a great example. They had to meet certain requirements for pH levels in their products, and you have to match that and keep going with that with every single time you make your batch. So generally speaking, you don't have to get a professional, lab tier pH scale. There are some really great ones that you can find on Amazon for anywhere from about $30 to $50 that work really well. It's just usually the capsule pH testers. If you use a pH strip, that's usually not considered accurate enough for that type of testing. But long story short, yes, pH levels generally need to be checked on a regular basis every time you make a batch, basically, and they do need to be logged as well. Let's see here. Let's see. Maya33 asks, what type of licensing would you need for a food truck or a concession pop-up kitchen? Does the food manager license apply to this as well?
Great question. So food trucks have kind of two different licenses that they could apply for. And it depends on the design of your truck and your storage and what you're making in your menu. So we sound like attorneys sometimes because we say, oh, that depends. But there are two options, and Kent County Health Department's website lays it out pretty well. So it's a license through the health department. So that's a first step that you can know. And you're either a mobile unit or an STFU. And an STFU is where you do everything on your truck. You can even wash dishes on your truck. All your food's stored on your truck. You're plugging in your food. Mobile food unit is you go back to a commissary and you store food there and you wash dishes there. So you sort of have to determine your truck layout, your menu, your storage, how that's all going to work. And I know sometimes it's hard to know which question to answer first. But Prep Space is a really great location for food trucks if you want to meet some food truck owners. A lot of trucks park at Prep Space in Wyoming. Does the food manager license apply to this? Yes. So you're seeking a health department license. They're going to want you to have a ServSafe manager level certification. Whoever's on duty on the truck and responsible for the food making must have a manager on duty. ServSafe level, manager level.
As well, with food trucks especially, keep in mind as well for food trucks, sometimes that can require some extra inspections. So you'll definitely have to pass for lack of a better term, a standard food inspection. But if you're doing cooking on your food truck, if you're using a fryer or a flat top, let's say, that's going to require a hood. If you require a hood, then you're going to have to obviously have a proper ANSEL system. Whenever you incorporate those types of things, there's a decent chance you're probably going to have to pass some type of fire inspection as well. So keep in mind with a mobile unit, there's oftentimes a couple extra steps that are involved. Again, like Kendra said, Kent County lays that out pretty well on their website. So definitely feel free to look further into that. But yeah, that's a great question.
And here's another note about food trucks. I'm learning more about that. I'm working with the Grand Rapids Food Truck Association to launch an online course on food trucks that will be free. There'll be a little bit of a registration through MSU, but it's a free account, free course. I did a bunch of videotaping of food truck owners to try and spread awareness about what's involved with starting a food truck business. So I'll let you know, Maya, when that's posted. I hope like tomorrow or the next day. I really want it to be posted. I hope to get it translated into Spanish as well. But there are different cities that require permits for food trucks, and you can operate in different zones too. So there are different costs. It's not a license per se. It's just a permit to operate. So sometimes getting licensed is just the first step. Then you need to be able to make sure you're operating under the correct permits. And a fire inspection may be required. If you go to Traverse City, for example, and do a festival up there, you may need to have a health department license to operate up there. You may need a city license. You may need a fire inspection to operate up there. So there are different rules for different cities that you have to kind of research and look into as well.
Let's see here. So Teresa is asking, what about dried herbs for teas? Does that require a commercial kitchen?
No. Wow. No, it doesn't. So you can do it under the Cottage Food Law, but if you want to sell online, you have to go to a commercial kitchen. So you can sell in a farmer's market that accepts cottage food. Not all markets accept cottage foods. That's another important thing. So markets have the right to set their own rules, and some markets have rules that don't allow cottage food vendors. So you want to do your research, because if you have your heart set on a certain market and then you learn they don't accept cottage foods, you'll be disappointed. So sometimes people just go and get their food license because they want to get in a specific market. But that is dried herbs for teas are allowed under Cottage Foods if you're selling face to face and you're abiding by all the cottage food requirements, labeling requirements, all those things that we talked about.
That's another note on cottage food. That's definitely one of the cons of cottage food. There's a lot of great things, but there's definitely some limiting factors. Cottage food, Teresa, it's great to get your foot in the door. It's a really great process for that. Unfortunately, once you get your foot in that door, it is very, very difficult to grow your business from there. Another outside of farmers markets, something to think about, pretty much any packaged food producer will eventually come across a point in their business life where they are going to get the opportunity for a great wholesale account. If you're cottage food, you can't do it. Now the nice thing about something like, if you're making your own tea blends, for instance, that is such a low risk that the licensing process for that is pretty easy and pretty fast. So for instance, something that low risk, depending on the amount of time that you have to spend on the process, we've stepped people through that licensing process for similar products in, about three to 4 weeks. So it can go fairly quick. But yeah, I would say, if you're starting off and looking to get your foot in the door, cottage food is great. If you're looking to make it more of a career and kind of your normal day to day, then pushing towards licensing is going to be the thing to help you get there for sure. Alrighty. Well, if anyone does have any more questions, feel free to enter them now. Kendra, could you speak a little bit more about kind of the relationship between licensing and farmers markets, like you referred to a little bit ago, and kind of why some do and why some don't?
Yeah, I think probably a lot of the bigger farmers markets have gotten to the point that it's competitive to get a spot in the market. And their primary vision is to have farmers selling produce. That seems to be in Michigan what drives customers to come to markets. They want the fresh produce. They want the sweet corn and the tomatoes, strawberries in June, and asparagus is first up. So that's what's bringing a lot of people into the market. Then the packaged foods and other foods are kind of secondary, and those are competitive spots, especially in big cities. Like our Fulton Street Farmers Market is relatively square footage wide small for as big a city as we are. So they have to be very selective on what kind of vendors they select. They have to get the right mixture of vendors. They don't want 10 cupcake retailers in their market. They have to be careful. And so requiring commercial food license is just kind of another way of making sure that vendor's experienced, that they're following all the regulations, they've paid their licensing fee, they know that they're making a safe product to the public. Now, we do have some markets that are more low-key, smaller community markets. I live in Lowell. I wouldn't be surprised if the Lowell market still accepted cottage foods. It's just a smaller market that may have more variety and not much competition for vendors. So it just really depends, on what style of market. A lot of the bigger city markets are limited on cottage food slots and then not allowing them. So you're welcome.
Great, thank you. So it looks like Maya has another great question. Should your 3-compartment sink be attached to the hand washing sink? That's a great question. So as far as if this is in reference to
in a food truck, I think she's saying in a food truck.
In a food truck, right? Okay, sure. In a food truck, so I guess if you definitely need to have it separated. You can't use one of your 3-compartment sinks as your hand washing sink. Now, depending on what type of mobile unit you have, if it's like more of a pull behind, like a trailer setup type of thing versus an actual food truck, that can make somewhat of a difference on your basically your dump tank or your dirty water tank. But generally speaking, in just basic food code sense, you definitely have to have those separated. Let's see. Christina Harvey has a question. Let's see. What type of license do you need to sell candy, pop, and chips from your home?
So I think you're asking about the Cottage Food Law, and that is actually not a license. So you would be operating without a license, but under a law, under the Cottage Food Law. So you can sell candy, you cannot sell pop. So soda, pop, beverage, not allowed under Cottage Food Law. Chips, dehydrated vegetables are allowed under Cottage Food Law. It sort of depends on your process. So if you're dehydrating, certain kinds of vegetables, you may be able to do that. But definitely not any kind of beverage is not allowed under Cottage Food Law. But again, remember, no online sales. So it kind of depends. Where do you want to sell it? How much money do you want to make? Who do you want to sell it to? What, where are your customers at? All those kinds of things go into your decision making on whether or not you want to operate under Cottage Food, or if you wanted to go for your commercial food business license. If you wanted to talk about a license to sell online for those kinds of products, it would be most likely through the Department of Agriculture and Development, because you're selling packaged foods. It's not considered ready to eat when you put something in a package. It seems kind of odd because chips, you open it up, I'm going to eat them, but it's considered a packaged food, not a ready to eat food. Unlike tacos, they're hot, they're in my hand, it's ready to eat. So.
And another big thing
yeah.
Another big thing to remember with that as well, just to reiterate what Kendra said earlier. Again, if you do fall under cottage food, just remember again, you do need to meet very specific and very strict labeling laws. So that's definitely something to keep in mind there. So Maya has a follow-up to her question. Looks like she's referring to her previous question, but this time in regards to a commercial kitchen. Same thing. So commercial kitchen. So basically, where you wash your stuff, where you wash your equipment, or your smallwares can't be the same place where you wash your vegetables, which can't be the same place where you wash your hands. Now, depending on the size of the facility, there are going to be some space requirements in the sense of, if you have a large enough space, let's say there's, 47 feet, like in a line, that's going to require you to have two hand sinks somewhere in there. So you need to have a hand sink basically max every 25 feet.
I was just going to say, how many sinks are there in your commercial kitchen, Ryan? 5, 6?
We have a lot of sinks.
Yeah.
We have a lot of sinks. So we obviously have a triple sink. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 hand washing sinks. Another 3 vegetable sinks. So there's a lot of sinks. Yeah. Yeah. And then also I believe there is a space requirement as well on how the proximity of what your mop sink, which you'll be required to have, is from any of those sinks as well. So that is something that is a great question, because it's a lot of little stuff like that, especially when someone is starting up their own brick and mortar facility. Especially it's those little things that kind of aren't thought of right away until the inspector's there, and then you find out, oh, I got to get this changed. So give me another month, But yeah, that's a great question. Great question.
It is. And, both the Department of Agriculture and the Health Department, depending on where your licensing is coming from, if you're thinking about building a commercial kitchen or rehabbing, they want you to call them early. They don't want you to put anything in like a 3-compartment sink and a hand washing sink and have them be in the wrong spots, plumbed wrong. They don't want you to spend money and have to redo it. So if you're thinking about, doing any kind of construction for a commercial kitchen, call whatever licensing agency is relevant. And you can call the wrong one. It's not going to offend them. If you called the State Department of Agriculture and you really needed the health department, no big deal. Just call one of them, make sure that you can contact an inspector and talk with them about your project and what's required before you spend money and get the wrong thing.
Definitely. Yeah. If you're operating out of a shared facility, an existing facility like that with multiple entrepreneurs, the process certainly is faster, because you you can't necessarily bypass it, but it's just a lot easier to put down the facility information when you get to the necessary paperwork. But yeah, definitely. If you are at the point where you're building your own food truck, you're building out, even if it's an existing space that you're just kind of refurbishing, as Kendra said, get a hold of inspectors right away, and do not be afraid to ask them questions before you spend money and hire contractors. Well, alrighty. With that, I think we will call it a night. Thank you, everyone, again, so much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Kendra, for joining us as well. We really hope that you guys were able to pull some useful information out of this. If you do want to get a hold of either Kendra or myself, our emails are in the description on YouTube as well. So please feel free to reach out to us if you have any further licensing questions or just general food industry, some general food industry guidance. Our next Culinary Conversations event is actually going to be the last Wednesday in May, I believe May 26th at the same time. Joining us that night will be Bobby Clays, who is the owner of Urban Pickle, which is an entrepreneur that hopefully many of you have seen over at Fulton Street Farmers Market. But Bobby's day job is actually he specializes and works with a lot of small businesses and entrepreneurs locally as well for branding, graphic design work, how to tie in your social media with your logo, with your brand, with your website, all that good stuff. So it'll be a whole discussion on branding for the food industry. So please feel free to keep an eye out on Meetup for the announcement for that event, and we hope you can join us. Thanks again for coming tonight.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks for hosting, Ryan.